Huh? Oh. Have you checked out this app? Amazon Rewards or Amazon Panel? Look, it's called Amazon Shopper Panel. If you will upload at least 10 receipts that are not Amazon receipts, just like regular shopping receipts, outside of Amazon, 10 a month, you get $10 in Amazon credit. Yeah. But let me send you a referral first, if that's okay. So I can get some bonus, whatever, if there's any available. I'll check it out. 1 second. I'll send it to you. Okay, yes, there's no referral program, so go ahead. Hopefully I can see it anyway. Oh wait, invitation. Okay, yeah, there must be. So, let's see how I go. I don't know. Fucking. Maybe I'll just go and do it. Are you wanting to download it? Amazon Shopper. Go ahead. If you want. What's wrong? Can we hide something?
A little bit slow, just a little bit.
Here, get some. You make it this time.
And then, we start finding a ride.
Oh, but we got.
I'm gonna bring that up again until. We should talk about that first.
Here's Jenny. Jenny.
Midland.
What if we see her getting naked and shit? And she was a pussy out and shit. Mom energy. You know, baby.
What's your view of your son?
Her husband, one of my shits.
Is he? I should say something to him.
Like, speaking.
Yeah.
What is the shit pack? Mama looks rough.
Huh?
Mama looks rough.
Yeah. the phone I want.
Where's the white thing?
Oh. Should be in the bag. What's wrong? You can't find it?
Check your bag.
It's not in my bag for sure. It should be in the blue pouch, maybe. No? Okay, one more place.
Let's use the big one.
Right here.
About 10 from this side.
Oh, shit.
Just gonna keep it off.
Okay.
Look at it. It's black.
Oh, nice. It's very nice. I love black things like that. None of my web pages will open if it's a Google ad. It doesn't open. It just gives me a page with a bunch of random characters on it saying it can't be opened. It's like everything on the shopping tab. Google. Put it in inside the hole.
9 square feet.
That was really cool wordplay. Is it?
We either need to pay before 10 or be out by 10.
I know.
I can't believe you tried to break in here yesterday.
Oh, shit.
I have a feeling we're going to try it earlier today.
Huh?
I have a feeling we might try it earlier today.
Oh, yeah.
At first I want to be like, hey, let's go stay for free at Tanya's. But then I got to thinking, and I was like,
Tanya doesn't have a Tanya's.
Hmm?
Tanya doesn't have a Tanya's.
I mean, her room.
No, I think honestly,
Or see if she'd get one for us in her name.
I'm good on that.
Okay.
We can get them in our own name. I mean, we can do just fine. Forget it. Got it. Come back in bed now. Come to bed now.
Let's focus. Get in bed. I love how Forrest Gump said, and I was moving my hips.
That was my laugh.
His Forrest Gump. I dare them to make fun of you.
Yeah, right.
It'll be bye-bye hotel. Hello. Worse than this. Ew.
What happened?
You're very brave for taking it. Just percolating. Make it vibrate.
Checking out the sounds of shaking on my door. Checking out the sounds of the people at my door. Checking out the sounds of the people at my door. And I think they're going to see me.
Someone's knocking at the door. Somebody's ringing a bell.
Oh. Ow.
Oh, was that you?
Yes, it was wet. What was that?
Oh, it was a piece of tomato. The tomato. They call them tomatoes. It just sounds very weird. So, I made a decision. As of today, I no longer call them tomatoes. Instead, I call them Tom-8-toes. Like tomatoes? Yes. So, take care of yourself first and foremost. And in that moment, you might die in the meeting. Everything done except for what you had to do. Jumping in the pool. Miss you, my girl. Started with that. I think that's it appeared up on me. So let me see. There's something on these rocks. Like, don't you agree, Abby? Send Earth Angel to her. Guarantee you she doesn't take it romantically. Sorry. That's delicious. It's pink and yellow combined. Makes a very pretty flower. Praying for 16. She said it actually was 1.69.
What's that mean?
Soon. I will send it into her now. Okay. Okay. Hurry up. We need to. swim with them, damn, crazy, my crazy grandmother. Sorry.
Whoa.
Sorry, that scared me.
What was it?
The cord when it touched my leg.
Flush it. Flush it.